Well, I will go ahead and get started then. So I've already got my screen shared here. I've got my slides open in the background here of MAXQDA. So greetings, everyone. It is about 1/4 past the hour, so I suppose we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn session on conducting qualitative data analysis with MAXQDA. My name is Joel Drevlow. I'm going to be with you for the next hour or so as we talk about all things MAXQDA. To give you just a brief introduction for myself and for the software, if you're not familiar with MAXQDA, I am a MAXQDA Cooperation Partner and certified trainer. So if you consume any online content from Verbi, from MAXQDA, YouTube videos, live webinars, or if you have ever come up to our booth at any academic or professional conferences, you may have met me or heard from me if you watched any of these things on video. So glad to be with you here today. I really am delighted to be here to give this talk and hopefully to get to answer some of your questions at the end. We're going to be holding some time for that. We'll see how light on my feet I can be as some of the trickier questions start to roll in. Events like these are really something about an aspect of my job that I really love. It's a great part to do. I started my career as a teacher, so getting these opportunities to come in and try and flex some of those old teaching muscles is always fun. To give you a little bit of a snapshot about MAXQDA, if you're new to qualitative data analysis software, or if you've just not heard of MAXQDA before, to give you just some of the big picture pieces, it is a qualitative and mixed methods data analysis software. It's produced by the parent company Verbi. And Verbi is based out of Berlin, Germany. The software itself has been around since about 1989. So we're a few iterations in on versions of MAXQDA. And maybe some of you have even used some of the very early versions on back in the day. I think Windows 95, Windows 98 was one of the first ones that came out. So to give you a quick idea of what we're going to try and talk about in today's session, sort of what I have planned for our activities today, I'm going to start out with giving you just a little bit of a tour of MAXQDA. So it's always tricky to gauge people's familiarity and sort of competencies with this stuff. Some of you may have never used this software before, so I'm going to try and give you a little bit of an orientation so you can see what does it look like, what are some of the options and functionalities that you have access to in the software. So that's where we'll start. We'll talk a little bit about the basics of coding, just the basics. We're going to focus more on just the functional aspects. We could spend an entire day talking about all of the concepts and things that go into how to build a coding system and what approaches do you take. And those are conversations I would love to have maybe outside of the session or towards the end if we have some time. So do feel free to post any of those questions in the chat or to reach out after today's session and chat with me about it. We'll also talk a little bit about some of the logic in MAXQDA. So it's termed activation or retrieval in MAXQDA. So grabbing things from particular documents, particular pieces of data, and particular codes. So we'll look at that a little bit as well. What we'll do in the second half of the session today is we'll actually try to look at a workflow demonstration. So, you know, a lot of these specific tools, they're there. They exist in the software. The tricky part is actually integrating them into your workflow, whether you're doing things individually or if you're working in a team setting. And that's kind of the tricky piece. And I think that's what we'll try and talk about today. There's a specific workspace that we're going to be talking about with the questions, themes, and theories workspace, which is a new addition to MAXQDA. I think was put out in about the last year or so. And it's a nice workspace where you're able to actually organize some of the analysis that you want to do in addition to the organization you've already done on your documents and codes and all that good stuff. So this is kind of with reference to today's title, that idea of systematic, comprehensive. So looking at a process that we can apply consistently across different documents or different pieces of data in a single project, or if we're working on multiple projects, how can we be consistent across all of those things? That's always kind of the fun part to develop as we get going. So that kind of takes us through our session outline. And again, I've got about 45, 50 minutes of material planned. I want to save plenty of time at the end for questions. If one pops up as we're going, please drop that in the chat, and I'll try and make sure we grab all those at the end of the session. I believe the slides are also posted in the chat too. There's a link to those if you want to download. I've got a PDF version that you're seeing here. There's some nice links, some discount codes, and MAXQDA stuff at the end of the slide deck that might be nice for you to have. All right. So I do want to talk a little bit more about just sort of give you a little bit more picture of what MAXQDA is if you are new to this particular software. So we talked about that it is, can we repost the PDF? I think, yeah, I think we can. I think Adam has the link. If he can drop that in the chat again, that'd be great. Thanks. So when we're talking about MAXQDA, obviously we talked about it being qualitative data analysis software. Just in terms of some of the positive aspects of MAXQDA, why it might be a good option for you if you're in that phase where you're looking for a QDAS tool. The versatility is a really big piece. I think that's something that is really great about MAXQDA. Basically, in terms of types of data, you can work with virtually anything. If I come up to my import tab here, you'll see text tables, transcripts, focus groups, images, audio, videos, survey data, Twitter, YouTube, all these different types of data you're able to pull into your project file and work with those directly. In addition, no matter what methodological approach you want to take, there's ways that you can customize your analysis to make it fit. So there's specific tools baked in for some types of analysis. For example, there's an open coding mode for grounded theory. You know, if you want to create a code system in advance and apply it to your data, if you're doing some content analysis, those possibilities are there. So virtually, no matter what type of data you want to use or what type of approach you want to take, you've got options, which I think is really nice. It's very accommodating. If you're new to this kind of software, if you're new to this kind of work, it's a very intuitive software. So the basic pieces and really the fundamental pieces, the coding, right? How you're actually putting codes on your data is a very straightforward process. And now the really fun kind of shiny bells and whistles towards the end, those take a little bit more research in terms of how you apply those and interpretation, what they mean and things like that. But that fundamental piece of actually establishing those sort of analytical codes and applying them to your data is a pretty straightforward process. And there's lots of great ways to document that process and to take notes and things. So we'll take a look at that as well today. The other thing I really do like is getting to do the kind of work that I do as a certified trainer is that network, that support network for researchers, for trainers. The MAXQDA Press putting out some great resources about how to work with specific types of data or do analysis, and a lot of those resources are free webinars and free textbooks. So it's kind of got that whole kind of nice package, a very versatile, intuitive, and supportive package to work with. So that's enough of my my MAXQDA sales pitch rant there. So as we get into this, we're looking at the specific pieces about, you know, how the way that we work through this, getting our project in a space where we can organize it, we can do our analysis, we can visualize, and we can generate reports. We're going to kind of walk through these pieces step by step. And I think doing the demonstration today in terms of the workflow using the QTT workspace and generating some of the things in that process, we can get to that really incremental step-by-step piece where we can avoid the instances where we might make leaps, and rather we have that incremental piece where we can really trace our work backwards. And so that's kind of what I want to try and get across today, is to give you just a general feel for what this software looks like and some ways that you can integrate kind of that workflow as you start to work with the software. So let's, excuse me. Let's go ahead and jump into a little bit of the orientation here as we look at what MAXQDA is. So a lot of this is structured like any application that you would see. Just a couple of notes. I am working on a Mac today, so this is exactly what it would look like on a Macintosh machine. It is identical if you go between Windows and Mac. There's no differences in terms of the options or what it looks like. No file conversion that's necessary. So in terms of collaborative work, that's a really helpful aspect. The software is structured with your ribbon up at the top, so you have all of your options. And if you notice, these flow from left to right in terms of operations in your project. So We start out with our home tab, which allows us kind of the global management features. So I can change my viewing options, how things are laid out on my screen. I can keep track of work I've done, data I've imported. I have some teamwork options available to me if I'm working in a collaborative way. And then some project management things, where I save my projects, what kind of files are incorporated, and so on and so forth. So as we move from left to right, then we have the different options. So we have this import option. First thing we got to do if we want to do a project is we have to import some data. We need some data to analyze. So that's going to be the first step, pulling data into our software. And MAXQDA is a database software, so all of your data lives inside the application. We do not have access to that in terms of if you're working with sensitive data or anything like that. It's stored locally on your machine. Next up is going to be your codes, right? You need to code your data. That's going to be the next process, your memos and variables, and you'll be doing note-taking, looking at how you can break out your coding by different variable values. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well, the mixed methods piece. And then we get down towards the final steps of your project where you're generating actual visualizations of your work and creating reports and things like that. So organized in a fairly logical way in terms of there's a specific function that you want to do, you find the specific function and you look for the subcategory of what it is you're trying to do. So fairly easy process. The interface itself is laid out in actually 4 windows. And so let me bring up an actual piece of data here. And I'm going to walk you through those windows just real quickly so you get an idea of what they are and sort of their purpose. And again, this speaks to that idea of organization. We're trying to keep our workspace nice and clean and segmented, so we do certain things in certain places. When we look at our document system, this is basically a file manager. This is where we store our data. And so in this particular case, this is an example project. And if you do want to find that, you can go to the open project and the example projects option down here. I'm working in this English work-life balance. The way we've organized this is according to data type, with the mindset being people want to see how different data types function in the software. So it's organized that way, right? So you can see what things look like depending on what type of data it is. Now, if you could organize this really any way you wanted to. For example, if you were doing like a pre-post analysis, you could structure it that way. You could have one folder. In this case, one folder might be pre and the other might be post. So when you do your analysis, you can get a nice, clear, and quick visualization if you're making a table or generating some kind of summary report between looking at the 2 different categories in that case. You could separate it based on demographic information that you have available, socioeconomic status, gender, degree of religiosity, whatever it may be, you could separate it that way. So there's a lot of customization that can happen here in order to make it work best for your particular project, your particular research goals. So when you've got your data in and you've got it organized in your document system, the next piece is your document browser. And so this is where you actually view your data. This is where it's displayed. It's just a simple double click. So if I double click on Salim's interview, you'll see it'll populate here in my document browser. And what you see in this window is 3 different columns. The column on the left here is your coding stripes. So this displays any coding that you have assigned, any codes that you've assigned to your data. The center column here is going to be your actual data. So in this case, it's an interview transcript. If I open up my sidebar, I get any notes that I've taken. So these can be memos, comments, or paraphrases. There's a whole, again, going back to that developing a code system, there's a whole idea of how you can use these different things to develop a code system. But essentially, these are annotations. So if I look at this, this is an annotation on this particular code. So it's additional context, it's additional information, keywords, whatever you want to keep track of. The nice thing is those things are together. So anytime I export that segment, my comment comes with, it's all there, my analytical notes. So what we get here is a nice view where we have our codes, our data, and any extra sort of commentary or annotations that we've added to our data. So it's a nice setup to have access to all of that stuff in one space. This is also a text editor. So if I turn this on and off, if I need to, I can make revisions and changes in my actual transcript. or if I wanted to take notes, just things like that. So there's a lot of capability here in terms of what you can do with that document. Additionally, we have our code system now. So we're moving on to our third window here. The code system is, in this case, it's structured hierarchically. I think that's probably most common in terms of, at least from my experience, in terms of how people develop code systems. So you have a top level code or category, in this case, work-life balance. That's the general idea of this example project is sort of life satisfaction and working and those kinds of things. So we have these top level codes, in this case, work-life balance, and then we have these subcodes that sort of define that category at a smaller level. In combination, they make up this larger category. So that's a fairly common way to approach this. You might have other instances where things might be in sort of a network where you might have codes existing in multiple places. That can be a little bit more complicated. You can find some really nice, when you're doing max maps and things, you can get some really cool visualizations from that. But typically, I would say it's pretty common to have this hierarchical nature. So you've got a parent code and all these subcodes underneath. In terms of how you build this out, you can build this in advance and import it into MAXQDA. You can create it from your software. You can be reading these and generating codes as you go if you're doing kind of a grounded theory approach. There's a lot of ways that you can do this, but essentially it's a way to keep your categories organized. And some of these, if you look, are more thematic in nature. And then we have some things like satisfaction, which I kind of look at more like structural things, just in terms of spotting satisfaction is a lot simpler than spotting, a reference to a particular topic here, right? It's a little bit more straightforward. So there's a lot of different ways that you can then work with these combinations. You can look at the intersections between these things as well. So once we've done all this, we've got our data in, we've looked at it in our document browser, we've added these codes. Now we can actually leverage the activation piece of MAXQDA where we can select specific documents and specific codes, and we can see how many instances, and sort of, we can also look at the qualitative nature, right? Like how are they actually talking about these specific topics or areas? So let me give you an example of that. Let's say in my, as I'm doing this, I want to see what did my interviewees from Berlin. So I'm going to activate this. You'll see these turn red. I've got a red arrow here. Down in my dashboard, I have 5 documents. I want to see what did my interviewees from Berlin say about their work-life balance. So I activate this top level code that activates all of my subcodes. And what this does then is populate in my retrieve segments window 61 coded segments, and I've got here from 5 document groups in one document, from 5 documents in one document group. So document group being the folder, Berlin, and the documents being those interviews. So what this allows me to do is just to review this data for one, if I want to see what people are saying with regards to this particular topic. It also allows me some other specific options. I can open my smart coding tool, which would allow me, if I'm working in an iterative fashion, I have these codes assigned. I can now look at the work, sort of this pre-processed work I've already done, and I can add additional codes. I can move them into different categories. So I can do some refining of this process. I can generate some visualizations. If I create a code relations browser, this would show me how these codes intersect. So where do they overlap? Like where do we see education and another code, for example? I can generate word clouds. I can do auto coding. I can export these things out of MAXQDA. If you have a colleague that does not work with MAXQDA, you can give them this data in a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet so that they can see what you've been working on. So this is handy if, if you're a student and you need to show some work to your advisors, you can easily get that stuff out and share that with them. So there's lots of opportunities sort of to leverage these features once you have this coding done. Is what enables you to do all of the fun stuff towards the end, where you're actually generating visualizations and reports and finding some of those things. So it can be, it's a very nice tool to be able to leverage, which is why that coding piece is so very important, because the things that you generate later on, they're all downstream of that process. So it's really important that you, designate some time to how you define those codes and things like that. All right, so in terms of an orientation, I think that's about all I want to show. There's a lot of stuff. There's a ton of tools and features in MAXQDA, so it would take a long time to show you everything, but this is just kind of the basics, so you get an idea of how things are organized and sort of what we're looking at in terms of the software. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of organization once more. We looked at it in terms of organizing in our document system by sort of apparent categories, here data type. We looked at it in terms of hierarchy in our code system. So these are ways to keep things straight. I want to look at this more now from the actual analysis point of view. So how do you actually structure that before you begin? And a lot of this has to do with your research topic and your research questions and those kinds of things, which ideally you would have certainly defined prior to probably even collecting any of your data. But one way that we can actually specify that and be very explicit about it as we start to conduct the actual analysis in MAXQDA is by using that QTT workspace. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what that looks like now. So if we go into the analysis tab, we will find our questions, themes, and theories. And if we read our description, it creates worksheets for important topics, add relevant code, segments, memos, visuals, etc., record key insights, and export the results to your report. So you can think of it kind of as a placeholder. You can specify a specific topic and research question. You could do this very early on at the beginning of your analysis. Then as you actually conduct things and as interesting things emerge or you stumble upon things in your data that you want to keep track of, you can export those things there. So it's like a built-in folder in MAXQDA to record your insights. And what's nice about this is, one, it's contained within the software. So you're not looking at parallel systems, right? Everything's in one project file. And once you have some of this built up together, you can actually export a document out that will give you a very nicely arranged and formatted report. So the copying and pasting nightmare that can be Microsoft Word sometimes is not going to be a problem for you. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So this is built in to the example project. So if you want to take a look at this for yourself, you certainly can do that. Every time you create a new worksheet, it's going to ask you to specify the title of your worksheet, which is a logistical piece. You'll need that as you export elements. You'll want to have an appropriate name so you know where you're sending something. So do take some time to give yourself a good name. The subject is going to be your broad topic, right? What are you interested in? What's your analysis point here? And your research question is going to be the pointed question. So what are you specifically looking into? And so in this particular example, we're looking at work-life balance and cognitive well-being, and the specific research question is, how does the separation between work and free time contribute? And so what we do here is we specify these parameters, our topic and our research question, and we pull in all the elements that we feel are relevant to this. It's kind of like a super memo. If you do have some experience with MAXQDA, it's just a gigantic memo where you can include all of this data and all of your notes and insights. So these are completely customizable. You can remove these if you don't have this element. For example, if you don't work with summary tables, you could remove that. If you don't do visualizations, you could remove those. You can also reorder these. So if you have a piece that you think is particularly poignant that you want to lead with, a great visualization, or some really great quotes that you want to start off with, you can prioritize that. So when you go to create your document, it's going to export as in that order. So you get some whatever is most important to you in terms of what you want to demonstrate. And as we go through this, you'll see that when we bring in elements, in this case, these are particular codes that are relevant to this. So codes from our code system that are relevant to this topic, we can include our insights on this. So essentially, it's a space for us to take notes. What I like about this, again, going back to the idea of tools versus process, is that this is not just a standalone tool. This is a way to integrate all of these different things into your work process. So it gives you the space to incorporate the element, but it also gives you the space to write about the element right away. If there's anything I've learned in doing this work and consulting with folks, it's that if you have an insight, write it down right away. I don't know how many times I've forgotten things or come back to something and can't remember the precise or the exact way that I had been thinking about it. So it gives you this really nice space where you can incorporate that element and you can incorporate your insights into that as you go. So you can do this for each individual piece. So as we go through these, you'll see there's insights on each element. When we get towards the end of this, then we have the actual option to see all of this in one place. And again, talking just about that sort of incremental approach where we're working step by step through this, we're sort of avoiding any of those larger leaps that we might make in our analysis. We have all of these pieces step by step. So we've identified our research question, we've pulled in the appropriate elements, we've commented on those elements, we roll those elements into this one space, and we can make our overall commentary on this. And so we have that at the bottom here where we have the integration, all these insights that we've made. We can stitch this all together into some kind of broader narrative so that we have something that can actually communicate meaning to folks outside of our project. And if we think about this sort of, again, in a systematic way, we can be using these worksheets for individual research questions and rolling these up towards larger topics. So it's really just a nice way for us to maintain some kind of organization as we start to do this. Especially if you have larger projects where you're working with lots and lots of different types of data or just large amounts of data, this can be a lot to manage. So this gives you a very explicit tool to work with that. So what I'm going to do, I think, for the remainder of the session today here is to give you a little bit of a demonstration of how this might actually work. So we'll create a new worksheet from scratch. We'll specify some of those parameters that we saw at the beginning, and then I'm going to go ahead and actually generate a little bit of analysis here, just some using some of the mixed methods tools in MAXQDA. We'll create some stuff and we'll actually pull it into QTT to give you a sense of what this stuff looks like. Oh, before I run onto that though, I do want to show you that final product that you get from this when you export this. So let's go ahead. We'll export this worksheet. I will save this on my desktop for now. And this is asking about macros. It uses macros to create a table of contents for you. So you do want to enable that, and so you can get that functionality. So if I come to my desktop and I find this file, worksheet 1, and I open this up, and you'll see the option that it's giving me to update fields in this. This is that macros command. I'll say yes. And I get this nice worksheet. It has my subject, my research question, all my table of contents. So I can jump right to my summary tables, for example. Everything is nicely laid out. And again, I mean, you can certainly do this with a parallel file in Google Docs or Microsoft Word, copy paste, and there's options to do that in MAXQDA. What I like about this is it just saves you some clicks. It keeps that organizational piece in-house in the MAXQDA project. And then it just allows you to avoid some of those fun formatting features that Word can sometimes present for you. So this can be a nice piece at a lot of different stages in your in the life of your project. So think about that in terms of, do you integrate this right away at the beginning in terms of your workflow? Do you do a little bit of analysis first and use this as a way to update others that are interested in your work? Do you do this towards the end where you're pulling everything together, or at all 3 stages? I think there's a lot of different ways that you can incorporate this, but it does generate a pretty nice report in terms of getting data out of MAXQDA. All right, so let's go ahead and do a little bit of a demo here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new worksheet, and we will name this the TQR demo worksheet. And the subject today that I just put together real quickly, this is not terribly interesting, but it's for demonstrations purposes. So we have got work-life balance and employment. And so I have some variable values that are available to me about employment status for my interviewees. So I'm going to use that as a criteria to break out some of the coding that I've done. So this is why I've chosen this as a subject. And for my research question, I'm going to specify this as, is there an association with employment status and individuals description of their work-life balance. Again, not terribly interesting, very basic research questions, but this is just an idea to give you a demonstration of sort of what this would look like. So clicking OK, I get my new worksheet. It opens up and I have a blank worksheet. If I go through these, I have no elements in here. I could start to add in particular elements. So let's, I'll just grab some codes real quick. So we'll grab, let's see, we'll grab our work-life separation. We will grab a typical workday, and let's grab flexibility, just 3 codes. And so we pull these in here. We have some codes that might be relevant to this. We can look at these particular coded segments. So here I can see my comments. I can see the actual piece of data here. What's nice is all of this is hyperlinked. If you saw that in the background, as I click on this, it takes me to the actual document in my document browser. So if I needed to catch the wider context in the case of like a long form interview transcript, it's there. It's hyperlinked, which I think is really nice about a lot of the visualization features in MAXQDA. So I've got that piece. What I want to do now is I want to create just a really straightforward visualization using some of the mixed methods tools in MAXQDA. So we're going to switch gears for a little bit. I'm going to talk about variables and sort of how you can use some of the mixed methods functions in MAXQDA. So we'll go ahead and I'm going to take this over to my other screen for now. So if I come up to the variables tab, you're going to see that I have 3 columns here at the top. I have one for document variables, one for code variables, and one for speaker variables. Most of the time when you use variables in MAXQDA, you'll be using document variables. So this is on the level of the document, which can be different depending on the type of data that you're working with. But in the case of an interview, it's the entire interview transcript. And in a way that's standing in for the interviewee. So we're looking at what are the specific variable values that are associated with that individual. A code variable, these are used mostly to sort your code system. So if you have a very, very expansive code system, you can use these variables, especially if you're working in kind of like a network model where you have codes all over the place. You can use these to grab certain codes throughout your code system that have certain variable values. So it's basically, it's just an ease of access kind of thing, a way to grab things that are relevant. Speaker variables here are for focus groups. So if you had 10 people in a focus group, you could grab all the individuals over 35, or you could grab all the individuals who make more than $60,000 a year, whatever variable values that you have available to you. For our purposes today, we're going to be working with these document variables as it's the most common and it's just the data that we have to work with today. So I'm going to show you real quick in my interviews. I'm going to right click here. And this opens up a dialog menu that's showing me sort of what options I have available. In my overviews option, I can take a look at all of the variable values that are associated with my interviews. And so when I open this up, this gives me a nice clean table where I can look at all of the various interviews, all the various variable values that are assigned to the interviewees in my project. And so I have 10 interviewees. And they're all listed here. So I have 10 rows. Each row is a person. And then each column is a variable value. And so the ones you'll notice there's a difference here. These ones in black, these are sort of system assigned. So MAXQDA creates these for you. So the number of segments, the number of memos, the date. You can see RIS. So if you're working with literature, if you're doing a literature review, it will pull in, like if it's a journal or if it's a book, it will pull in the name of the author or the title. So there's some nice pieces here too as well. So it's not just interview data. You can use this with virtually any type of data. Now the blue columns are going to be user defined. So these are ones I've created or the creator of this project made. So they can be a lot of different ways. I have some categoricals here. You can have some continuous variables with number of children. I have some ordinal things here in terms of number of hours. We also have some Likert data, so listed on a scale. So this can be really nice with survey data. If you want to look at individuals who are satisfied or dissatisfied, you can set the logic for that, all scores above 3. But the point is, what we can do after we've done our coding, I can use these variable values to say, how is my coding distributed by membership of a certain group? And I can get some interesting kind of breakdowns here that can help me do some sort of writing up of what I'm seeing, or also point me in the direction of where I need to collect more data and when I need to do more stuff, which I think is the case that you're going to see today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be looking at this employment column, and I'm going to be breaking out my codes based off of membership in that column. So we'll go ahead and close this out. If I come to my mixed methods tab, to do that, I need to make a cross tab, a cross tabulation. So this, if I hover here, creates a codes versus groups table that allows you to compare code frequencies. These groups are formed by documents with selected variable values. So I'm using my variable values to break out my data as I've coded it. And so in this case, we're going to be using that employment status column. One thing that's really helpful when you create visualizations or you generate reports is to activate the data that you want to use before. So first thing I'm going to do is clear any activations. So you can see I'm set to 0. I want to work with just my interviews. So I'll activate those. So I have 10 documents. And I want to work with this work-life balance. And let's do the work situation codes. So I have 2 codes. Well, actually more. I have 14 codes, 2 top-level codes. And so what I'm going to do here is come to my crosstab now, and I'm going to generate this visualization. I'm going to use this employment category. So you see here I have listed all of my different variables that are available. And if I double click this, it will send in my employment variable. But now I need to specify my category or my actual value. So I can choose one of the 4. So you can see I'd have to do this 4 times. What I can actually do to speed this up is select this, insert all variable values. This gives me all 4, right? Because I want all 4 in this case. And you'll see that I have checked here only for activated documents and only activated codes. So I'm segmenting from my project. I could have 10,000 documents, and I worked with people who have more than that in their MAXQDA projects. So I want to grab certain things, right? It's going to take forever to load if I try to do it the whole project file. So I want to use just the data that I'm interested in. It's going to be a lot more easy to read and understand. Do note that there is some logic up here. So if you're working with like continuous or ordinal data, you can set ranges. So like the survey example, respondents above 3 or people above 35, you could specify those particular ranges. So there's a lot of kind of cool combinations that you can do here. And if you have the stats package, there's even cooler stuff that you can do. So I'm going to click OK. And this is going to give me a nice, clean table. What this table is showing here is the distribution of my codes based off of the variable value. So the columns are my variable values and the rows are my codes. So I can see that individuals who are employed, we coded for education 8 times, family 30 times, and so on and so forth. So we could start to draw some comparisons, right? Obviously, we have a really high number here versus the others. Now, this is going to be thrown off slightly by the fact that 7 of our speakers are employed and only 1 and 2 and 0 on the other columns. You can see what we're probably getting at here is we need to collect more data if we want to make sure that our comparisons are somewhat accurate here. But it gives us a sense of sort of the distribution of our codes based on these particular variable values. There's a lot of ways to customize this in terms of the amount of data that's shown. We can look at things, in this case, number of segments, which I think is most common, but you can calculate things row-wise and column-wise. You can look at it as a percentage. We've got lots of options here. Now, the way that QTT comes into this, you see this icon here, send to QTT worksheet. And let me bring this in. And I'll open up my visuals and statistics. You'll actually see it pop in here. And so when I go to add this to QTT, I'll send it to my TQR demo worksheet. And you see it pops up right here in the background. I've got it in my workspace. And now immediately I can add in any insights that I might have. And in this case, what I'm probably going to be look at is need to collect more data, especially from individuals, why can't I spell that word today, that are unemployed. Right, if this was a necessary aspect of our research and we wanted to investigate this, we would obviously need to collect more data because according to my visualization, I don't have any at the moment for individuals who are unemployed. So that would be something that we could incorporate here immediately. So we can incorporate sort of our next steps. We can look at sort of those other pieces in terms of building this out. So you can see how you can incorporate this at multiple points in the life cycle of your project, early on as a way to sort of capture things that you send out in terms of, things that you come across in your analysis that you want to either pivot towards that might be relevant to do more of an investigation into, or if you're at a midpoint and you need to give people updates, or if you're at an endpoint and you need to generate some actual reports from the data and analysis that you've collected and performed. All right, so let me give you one other piece about this mixed methods option here for your crosstab, and that is the interactive quote matrix. So this field is nice, right? It gives us a sense of how things are distributed, and code counts, I think, are a great place to start in terms of looking at how our analysis and our coding work is shaking out. But we're doing qualitative data analysis, so we want the qualitative data, right? The interactive quote matrix is going to create a window where you have 4 separate columns that correspond to whatever variable values you specified, in this case, employment status. And then every time I click on a code, it's going to populate that column with my data. So I can actually get a nice comparison. So I can look at what employed individuals were actually saying versus, in this case, self-employed, or in this case, students. So I get a nice comparison where I have all of these things available to me on the screen. In addition, you can include your code comments. So any annotations that I've added as an analyst, any of my researcher notes or specific commentary on these codes, I can actually include that here as well. So again, this idea of this sort of step-by-step incremental process of working in bits, right? Not trying to, what's the analogy about to eat an elephant, you start one piece at a time, something like that. Kind of this sort of incremental process where we do this thing step by step. This can be kind of a nice view. And again, unfortunately, this piece you can't incorporate into QTT, which I think is kind of a bummer and something I might need to select to the forward to the development team. But you can get these things out via Word and Excel. So if you wanted to share this with a colleague, again, that doesn't have MAXQDA, you could certainly export this stuff if you wanted to conduct additional analysis that way. So this can be kind of a nice piece in terms of, the variable piece. You can use that early on to identify specific documents. You can, of course, activate things by variables. So if I wanted to grab something by a specific variable value, like we just saw with employment, I could specify individuals that are employed. I could activate that, and you see I activated 48 documents across. So I think I have some survey data. Yeah, I have some survey responses that hit that criteria as well. So you could use this early on. If you had a portion of data that you wanted to start your analysis on, you could identify those categories based off of your variables, or you could do your coding first, and then you could break things out by those values. So there's lots of different ways to approach this, which I think is sometimes why it's kind of hard to teach this stuff, because there's really no straightforward way to get through this from point A to point B. Yeah, so I think in terms of sort of things that I wanted to talk about today, that hits most of it, just in terms of the organizational space that's available to you with QTT. And then, of course, how to get elements in there. And then also some of these mixed methods features. This is something when I go to conferences, I think just about 2 out of 3 people ask me, how do you do mixed methods in MAXQDA? And so it seems to be a very popular thing these days in terms of the types of analysis that people want to conduct and sort of the data that's available to us. So it's a nice space. But I think looks like we've got about 15 minutes left. I think we're right at 1 o'clock. I did want to just point out a couple things before I start taking any questions. First of all, just some extra resources for you. We have available to you on maxqda.com/trial. There is a 2-week full free trial. So you get the full MAXQDA, I believe it's Pro package. So everything that you can possibly do, it's accessible to you. So you can download that and try it for 2 weeks for free. And that, again, has everything that's available in the software. So if you did want to try things out, if you want to play around with the software a bit, see if it fits your style and your needs, you can absolutely do that. You can also find a ton more information on the website, maxqda.com. There is some really great resources on there. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. So on the website, if we were to look here, this is one I would definitely check out, the MAXQDA Press under resources. Max Days is coming up here in March. If you want to see more stuff like this, do check out the workshops and webinars. We have a lot of those every week in multiple languages as well, if you would like one in a language other than English. So I do encourage you to check that out, play around with the website. There's a ton of really cool stuff on here. And if you are currently using MAXQDA and you're not a member of the research network or the trainer network, you should definitely check that out too. A really great place to expand your professional network. And we always like having people added to that. The last thing I would give a pitch for is Max Days coming up in March. It's a free virtual conference. Link to register is here in the slides. More content similar to this, some instructional stuff, but also a lot of researchers just talking about the work that they're doing. There's some really cool sessions that are planned. So I encourage you to check that out as well if you have some time available. And then the last thing here in our slides, if you are interested in purchasing, we do have a conference discount for you for being an attendee at the conference. And so you can check that out. But I think I will stop with my spiel here and see if there are any questions as of yet.
Joel, thank you. Could you please demonstrate some of the visual features of MAXQDA, like, for example, the graphics of bar charts, of network displays, things like that?
Yeah, for sure. I can do that. Let's start with the bar charts first. That's a pretty easy one to do. One of the easiest ways to generate counts like that, you can do it in a couple ways. So with variables, I can actually do document variable statistics. So I could grab specific variable criteria that's available to me here. For example, let's just use that employment one again. I can pull that in, and what I can get here is a table value of the number of people that are employed in this case. I can visualize. This is not terribly interesting because I don't have different criteria, but you can get essentially counts of your variable values. So if you're working with survey data, for example, you can get a nice quick count of individuals that fit a certain criteria. So that's here in your document variable statistics. You can also do this with coding. So if I were, anytime you have subcodes, and I think this is going back to that way you structure code systems, having this way to look at this hierarchical structure allows you to do things like doing subcode statistics, and that's just a right click here and subcode statistics. And so we'll look at coded segments, and no, we won't do activated codes. And yeah, we'll do for activated codes here. And so what this will show me is, and again, a lot of this you can already see here. This is already in your readout, right? 24 segments are attached to this code, but here I can actually get a visualization. So if I wanted to share a breakdown of, I applied this code this many times, or a percentage of documents contain this code. And again, I don't think that's going to be the only substance of your analysis, but it's a great place to start. And in terms of getting people into some of the work that you've done or giving updates on stuff. It's a great one. So that's a pretty quick and dirty way to do counts. Notice there's lots of customizations here in terms of how you display this stuff. You can go through, if you add multiples in here, you can cycle through them in this option as well. So that's something I would probably just ask you to play around with to figure out how to set these parameters and things. In terms of the visual tools, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. I think in general, the way that visual tools shake out is things are either structured as in a table format where you're looking at counts, right? If I do a let's just do a code matrix browser here, and I'll structure this at second level document groups. So I'm going to compare between Berlin and Hamburg here. And what I get here is a breakdown of the distribution of, and I don't know why these are showing, but the distribution of my codes in these two groups. And so maybe I could say, you know, the socioeconomic status in Hamburg and Berlin is different, and therefore, you know, they talk about friends more than in Hamburg, right? Which probably doesn't make sense, but so in this case, we're looking at like a density plot, right? So the size of the node is reflective of the number of segments. We can also look at this in terms of the numbers and things like that. There's also ways to conceptualize this with distance, which would be like the code map here, where we would pull in, here we would have a visualization that shows the similarity of these things. So the closer they are on the map, the more similar they are applied. The bigger the node, the more frequently they're applied. The thicker the line, the more frequently they occur together. So qualitative data analysis visualizations are really interesting, just in terms of how it's not as straightforward as quant stuff, right? Where you're looking at histograms and scatter plots and stuff like that. So I think in general, most of what you're looking at is either spatial representations of this, how close or how far or close are things represented on a map, or code counts, right, where you're looking at frequencies and things. And so I think you've got a nice mix of that in MAXQDA. But in general, it follows the logic of activate some documents, activate some codes, and create your visualization. There's a ton more of this. There's I actually just did a webinar, I think a couple weeks ago, on visual tools. So I would there's some good stuff to check out on YouTube and other places as well. I hope that sort of answers your question a little bit.
Hi, Joe. I have a question for you.
Sure.
As far as transcribing, when a researcher does their interviews, do you have a feature on there that you can transcribe from the recorder to your software? And by the way, great presentation.
Thank you very much. So MAXQDA does not have built-in auto transcription, but we do have a tool. So let me show you what that looks like. So I have a video interview here, and if I right-click, I can transcribe my video file. And what this will do is it will bring up my video, my wave line, or whatever this is called. And I have an opportunity to create my speaker notations and change some hotkeys to do rewind and things like that. But it is a manual tool. You'd have to type this out. And the one kind of nice piece about this is you can code. So I have my codes available to me here as I transcribe. So I know for some people that is really a core feature of how they do research. They're very detailed in how they transcribe things, and they would actually like to code. So that might actually fit. For other people, I know when I've done transcription, it's kind of a nightmare. It's a lot of typing. So again, it's not auto, but there is a tool where you can do some of that as you go. I'll also say that we have under the transcripts tool, we have API with a number of different transcription services. So if you have a third-party application, you can do your transcription there and then import it into MAXQDA. And if you have like an audio or video file with timestamps, you can also link those. So if you want to be going back and forth, reading your transcript, but then listening to the audio or watching the video, you can do that as well. In terms of which one's best, I don't have a favorite. I know that depending on the language of the data that you work with, some are better than others. So I believe F4, I think, is really good for German, is what I think what I've heard from some of my German colleagues. And then some are better for English or Spanish, whatever language you may be working with.
Very good. Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions from folks?
I have a question. I put it in chat, but I'll go ahead and ask it.
Sure.
Do you have any kind of sort of workarounds for students with visual disabilities? So I advise students who are blind, have low vision, and yet they have large qualitative projects that's here. And I mean, part of it's just been me entering things into, but I wanted to ask, since it's in the presentation about like accessibility and
Sure.
how do you address things like that to make them have more agency on doing their own stuff to get the benefits rather than to having everybody else have to interface with it and translate it to them?
Absolutely, yeah. So off the top of my head, I don't know of any specific things that are incorporated. I know that in the settings, there's some very basic things where you can change a little bit of stuff with the user interface. So there's ways that you can adjust the display, the language, the text size, and things like that, as well as fonts. Beyond that, I don't know off the top of my head if there's any specific features that are available that would accommodate things like that. In terms of like accessibility things, are you looking for like different ways that they can interact with the software, or like different keyboard functionality or stuff like that? I'm just not experienced enough to know exactly what type of resources you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, it could be anything from like JAWS and things to make it visual, or things that read it out loud, that they can have that type. It's just, we need to make university-wide decisions about qualitative software, and that's something that would weigh into choosing one or the other. So this seemed like a good place to ask it.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't have more explicit information. That's something I'll definitely ask about in terms of resources or functionality. They're always updating the software. So there is, if you go right here, there is, yes, I believe it is this one. There is an option to submit feedback. Yeah, it is this little smiley face icon. There is, and I'll just pull the window over. So
I can do it through there. I have my own copy, so I can do that. Just something I wanted answered. All the rest is really good. I use it. It's great software, but I'd like more people to be able to, and students, that we can bring it into classrooms, because we can make it accessible to everyone. So that's been a constraint about bringing MAXQDA or anything else into classroom teaching of methods, because we can't make it accessible.
For sure. Absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up. Appreciate that. Somebody's asking, how can I get the software? So I'll bring that website over again. So on maxqda.com, you can start right here with the free trial. So that will initiate a downloader, and then you install from there. And that'll give you two weeks where you can play around with it, see if it's a good fit for you, and if it works for the type of research analysis you want to do. If it does, once that 2 weeks is up, it will ask you basically to subscribe, and it's on a subscription basis. If you want to see more about that, you can go to the pricing options, whether you're a student or academic faculty or private organization. But you can start here, and then remember, I shared that code today as well. This is in the slides, a discount code as well. So this is valid through March 30th, so you can get 20% off your purchase if you do decide to go with MAXQDA. So you can initiate your download there, and then start from there. All that stuff is handled, just so you know, is handled through third party. We do business like all over the world, so they handle the sales. So if you get redirected to another website, don't freak out. It's supposed to work that way. All right. Well, I think we're right up at time, and I don't see any more questions. So do we want to stop here for today, or?
Thank you for doing such a an interesting and an informative presentation. You probably have done this once or twice before, and I think it's remarkable, not to just get to be bored by it all. You're very responsive, and it's interesting, and it has so much potential. It's just I'm just going to try to work on understanding the tip of the iceberg, but you got to start somewhere. And your presentation is very good. So thank you for being so engaged in presenting it, because I know how sometimes it can be. And you're wonderful. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. I love teaching. I like doing the research, but honestly, I think I enjoy teaching the method side of it more than anything. So that's
you have talent.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I do encourage you to reach out. I listed my email address here. If anybody has any questions or you want to chat further about MAXQDA, joel.drevlow@IQDAS. I'd love to hear from folks after the session. Thanks to everyone, Adam and all the folks at TQR for inviting me to participate today. It was a really great experience.
Thank you, Joel. And for the folks that are still here, we'll be posting a recording to this on our conference website and our YouTube channel, and I'll make sure that we send and share that with everybody. Hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference. Our next session begins at 1:30. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
Hey,